Welcome to the 2025 Annual Duldig Lecture on Sculpture. I'm Janine Kibblewhite, the President of the Duldig Studio, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar. Alison Inglis will formally introduce Judith Ryan, who is presenting this year's lecture. Following her presentation, Judith has kindly agreed to answer some questions. Following the questions, Anthony de Jong, our founding board member and immediate past president of Duldig Studio, will conclude the program this evening. The Annual Duldig Lecture on Sculpture was inaugurated in 1986 to commemorate the life and work of sculptor Karl Duldig and artist and inventor Slava Horowitz Duldig. I'm delighted to introduce Associate Professor in Art History at the University of Melbourne, Alison Inglis, who will in turn introduce tonight's speaker. Dr. Alison Inglis is an Honorary Associate in Art History at the University of Melbourne. Her primary field of research is 19th-century art and design, but she's also a long-standing interest in history of Australian art, museums and art exhibitions. She has extensive experience in the field of curatorial studies, having been for many years the course coordinator of the Masters of Art Curatorship program at the University of Melbourne. She's also participated in the wider Australian art sector, especially by serving on boards of several cultural organisations, including the National Gallery of Victoria, Museums Victoria, and Heide Museum of Modern Art. She was awarded the Member of the Order of Australia, AM, in 2020, Australia Day Honours for significant service to education and the museum and galleries sector. Alison is also a long-standing associate of Duldig Studio, a past board member and life member. So please welcome Alison Inglis here tonight.
Thank you, Janine. I'm delighted to be here this evening, and I'm honoured to introduce the presenter of the 2025 Duldig Lecture on Sculpture, Judith Ryan AM. But before I continue, I would like to first acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the unceded land on which we work, learn and live here in Victoria and across Australia. Judith Ryan AM is the Senior Curator, Art Museums and Collections at the University of Melbourne, where she recently co-curated with Professor Marcia Langton AO and Shanysa McConville the landmark exhibition 65,000 Years, A Short History of Australian Art, which was a truly remarkable staging of over 400 works, celebrating the brilliance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art that loudly proclaimed the importance of Indigenous knowledge and agency, while also confronting the darker history of the colonial era. She also co-edited with Professor Langton the major scholarly publication that complemented the exhibition, and it was an extraordinary event, and I hope many of you saw it and have acquired the catalogue. I first became aware of Judith Ryan well over 30 years ago in the late 1980s, when she began introducing Melburnians and Australians more generally to the power and wonder of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art. Of course, she had been working at the NGV for over a decade before that time, initially as the circulations officer responsible for touring art exhibitions, and then as the curator of pre-Columbian art and also editor of the gallery's publications. The latter editorial appointment reflected Judith's university training, for she had received a double BA Honours in Fine Arts and English Literature at Melbourne University, as well as a certificate from Oxford University in the 1970s. Judith was appointed Assistant Curator of Aboriginal and Oceanic Art at the NGV in 1987, and over the following 10 years, she just created an absolute storm of exhibitions and acquisitions that left a really remarkable impact. Here are a few highlights from that initial 10 years. Firstly, she secured the purchase of Tim Lura and Clifford Possum's Great Spirit Dreaming Through Napabi Country, which was the Felton Bequest's bicentennial acquisition for 1988, and she did this in the face of considerable internal and external opposition. She then staged a series of extraordinary exhibitions of Aboriginal art, which I remember very clearly. In 1989, she curated Mythscapes, Aboriginal Art of the Desert, the first Indigenous exhibition staged in the Murdoch Court. So the first time we really had a blockbuster presentation of Aboriginal art. And the following year, she produced Paint Up Big, Warlpiri Women's Art from Lajamanu, which this was done at the women's of that community's request. It followed on from Mythscapes and included women's work only. And this was a critical time when we witnessed the emergence of contemporary women's art within the Aboriginal movement. That same year, 1990, she also staged Spirit in Land, bark paintings from Arnhem Land. You see her focusing across the great communities of Aboriginal art producers around the country. And these bark paintings were almost all from the NGV collection, reflecting her active acquisitions. The following year, 1991, she showed an exhibition of bark paintings and silk textiles from the Tiwi Islands, while 2 years later was the phenomenal Images of Power, Aboriginal Art of the Kimberley. This was the fourth of these grand special exhibitions that all were accompanied by scholarly catalogues. The artist Rover Thomas was present at the opening of Mythscapes, as well as a host of artists from Fitzroy Crossing. And I remember this was the first time I saw Rover Thomas's art in any detail, and it was just a revelation. Of course, Judith was also busy researching and securing many major, as well as more specialist minor acquisitions throughout this period. And this is probably best summed up by her successful negotiation of the gift of Emily Kamekanware's Big Yam Dreaming to the NGV in 1995. 2 years later, she presented Gingerili, which was the first major retrospective in Australia of an Aboriginal artist with a definitive exhibition catalogue. So you can see there were a lot of firsts during Judith's time as a curator in the 1980s and 90s, and it's hardly surprising that she was appointed Senior Research Curator of Australian Art in 1993, a role that would go on to be given the title Senior Curator of Indigenous Art. Judith continued this breathtaking record of achievement, comprising groundbreaking research, acquisitions and exhibitions over the next 20 years, a time period which included her overseeing the opening of the new Indigenous galleries at the Ian Potter Centre for Australian Art in 2002. And really, during her time as curator, you see her really establishing the entire collection in a major way of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander art at the NGV. And the breadth and diversity and excitement of that collection was really presented with drama at that opening of the NGV Australia. Other firsts, even for Pacific art, were under Judith's oversight when she presented Wisdom of the Mountain, Art of the Omi at NGV International in 2010. She also curated with Philip Batty the magisterial Chukaman Majanu, Origins of Western Desert Art, to mark the 40th anniversary of the Papunya movement. This exhibition actually toured to Paris in 2012, the first Indigenous Australian exhibition to be staged at the Musée Quai Branly. And her grand swan song at the NGV at the end of her 44-year career there was the brilliant Tiwi exhibition 2021. But as one door closed, another opened, and in 2021, she was appointed curatorial advisor at the University of Melbourne to work on 65,000 Years, a short history of Australian art. And going on from the triumph of that exhibition, she is today Senior Curator, Research of Collections, to the great good fortune of the staff and students at the University of Melbourne. During her illustrious career, Judith has assisted in acquiring thousands of works of art, curated over 50 exhibitions, and published numerous catalogues and articles, all focused on revealing to the wider public the magnificence of Indigenous art. In 2003, Judith was awarded a Centenary Medal for services to Indigenous art and culture. And in 2017, she was appointed a member of the Order of Australia in the General Division for significant service to the visual arts, particularly to the museums and galleries sector, as a curator of Indigenous exhibitions and as an author. We are so fortunate to have her deliver this evening the 2025 Duldig Lecture on Sculpture. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honoured to present Judith Ryan.
Alison, I'm a little bit flawed for words after all that because it brings back a lot of exciting times in my life. It's been a life journey. I want to begin this lecture by acknowledging the traditional owners of the place where I am presenting this lecture and where I grew up, the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. It is important to recognise that these stolen lands and waterways were never ceded, and that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture is, as the visionary anthropologist W.E.H. Stanner stated, possessed of all the beauty of song, mime, dance and art of which human beings are capable. I welcome any First People who are here tonight to hear this lecture, and also honour all of the artists who made the sculptures that I will be presenting. The sculptures that I will show you tonight matter. Fashioned with ultimate finesse by Indigenous artists, they are as modern and ancient as the ages. They resonate with an aura of power, blood, beauty and spirit, and may transmit dangerous ideas or visit an uncomfortable white supremacist era in Australia's history. Consider the words of Simon Sharma. The power of art is the power of unsettling surprise. Its mission, beyond the delivery of beauty, is the delivery of truth. What we have in these sculptures is, in the words of John Keats, truth and beauty. That is all you need to know in this world, and that is what these works possess. Indigenous sculptors work in ways that bypass the written and reveal overt or covert truths about Australia's history, their family, history, identity and intrinsic connection to place. Art is, however, not only about politics, slogans, overt statements or the propaganda of protest. The aesthetic sensibility of a sculptor is a force to be reckoned with and ultimately determines the success or failure of a sculpture. The personal is aesthetic as well as political. Prior to colonisation, the main locus of First Peoples art was ceremony. Objects were made to be seen and used by members of a specific cultural group and then erased or left to the elements. Today, Indigenous sculpture is an intercultural medium that exists in the marketplace as a transformation or a physical manifestation of ancestral beings, designs, ritual objects, of what is unseen, ephemeral or intangible. As Guningu artist Balang, John Mawangel, has explained, when Europeans arrived, the old ways of making art changed. The old-fashioned way of making art has finished, and we are new people making new kinds of art together for non-Aboriginal people as well. Moreover, Balang's brother-in-law, Ivan Namariki, has asserted, our spirits lie in the water. We didn't create this culture recently. It lies in the ground. It lies in the earth, but we are bringing it out. We bring it out and give it material form and presence for non-Aboriginal people as well. Unlike the arts of Africa and the Pacific, where sculpture is the dominant art form, often expressed in dynamic masquerades, towering masks and fetish objects that were of immense fascination for the Cubists, Surrealists and early modernists. Painting is the principal art form of Aboriginal Australia and plays an important role in the three-dimensional intercultural art forms made today. The main cultural regions renowned for their sculpture across time are the Torres Strait, Melville and Bathurst Islands and Cape York, all in far northern Australia. Many of the historical cultural objects and inventive sculptures that are the focus of this lecture are painted with designs specific to the artist concerned that encode meaning and are closely associated with song and dance. The artist is the land he or she he or she sculpts, incisors, and makes permanent. A sculpture may also be considered a self-portrait. Works composed of materials of the land by artists living on country that make visible designs and objects bequeathed to them by their ancestors are supremely true and therefore beautiful statements of law and knowledge, more political than any overt slogan or poster. They embody the power of the land and the artist's oneness with it. Increasingly, sculptural installation composed of modern post-industrial materials is used as a means of confronting loss and of daringly exposing and questioning colonial and post-colonial atrocities experienced by Australia's First Peoples. Indigenous Australia, like Papua New Guinea, is composed of many different peoples or nations, speaking mutually unintelligible languages and dialects. Its dynamic forms of artistic expression make it impossible to generalise from one cultural group, art style, community or region to another. The generic notion of Aboriginal, Indigenous or First Peoples sculpture therefore exists as a construct of which individual artists and nations comprise but one tiny part. I have selected sculptural objects from across language groups, traditions, media, time and space. Imagine viewing these objects in natural light and from 360 degrees in 3 dimensions, not flattened into shiny PowerPoint or computer images like TV screens, which is increasingly how many First Peoples objects are now viewed, devoid of the materiality, texture and scale of a direct encounter. One cannot ever replace standing in front of a work of art of any kind and experiencing directly the voice of the artist. In the beginning was the I, and then there was the word. So what I want you to do is to look intently and intensely at all the images that you will see tonight. These rare pre-contact masks and headdresses collected before Alfred Haddon's 1888 expedition to the Torres Strait are of unknowable ritual power, precious materiality and finesse, and would come alive when worn and danced in men's secret sacred ceremonies. The turtle shell objects incised with mineral surface patterns of sophistication project a ritual frisson, the cry of the dance, and possess a truth to materials. Now, of course, turtles are restricted in Australia. They're a protected species, so artists devise different materials to make objects inspired by these incredible examples. When considering contemporary Torres Strait Islander sculptures, which derive from the treasured art of ancestors, one should ponder the words of Ricardo Idagi, a great sculptor based in Melbourne. Colonial governments and missionaries have failed to extinguish our culture or our identity or our belief in our law. My motive is to encourage young people to live, walk, and practice their heritage for the next 100 years. That which is sacred, if not talked about, will be forgotten and lost forever in time. We now go to the tiwi. These towering ironwood abstracted Tutini poles commissioned by relatives of the deceased for Pukamani or mourning ceremonies are unique to the Tiwi people of Melville and Bathurst Islands. The ones on the left were all collected from Milakarpiti in the 1950s by Dorothy Bennett, and then they were acquired by the National Gallery of Victoria, and they were the only Indigenous works to be displayed when the NGV opened its St Kilda Road building in 1968. Such carved and painted memorials that are positioned around the deceased's grave are believed to bleed into the ground. They are expressions of individual carvers' remembrance and inventiveness, their painted designs inseparable from those worn for song and dance. Tiwi people say, to sing is to dance is to paint, also to carve. Show these representations of Tiwi ancestors, Porukapali and Waiai, carved from termite-resistant ironwood, carved by both women and men, because women and men attend Tiwi ceremonies. They've been painted up for Pukamani ceremonies, and some wear false beards of disguise. And they reveal a range of individual carving and painting styles as each of these sculptors is imagining and giving a physical form to their primordial ancestors, Porukapali and Waiai. Some, like those of Kitty Cantilla or Enrailed Monkara, are very modern in their reduction of the form to the block. Departing from post figures, next, so we need to see some more. Look how different these individual sculptures are, and remember that for Tiwi, innovation is highly prized in all of their art forms. And these figures actually derived from the tutini, the poles made for Pukamani ceremony, and they were carved to share with outsiders. Kado Kiranawa, the two figures on the right, carved a bima and Porukapali for Her Majesty the Queen when she visited Australia very early on. Departing from post figures derived from Tutini poles, the zoomorphic sculptures of native and introduced species are very playful. Look at that kangaroo and the introduced buffalo and so on. Tokombini, the pelican, is another favoured subject of Tiwi sculpture. The rudimentary stringy bark and ridgepole construction of this bark shelter, commissioned by rock art specialist George Shalupka, memorialises a customary shelter that renders visible powerful icons of Gonwingu customary law and sculpture. The great thing about seeing this bark shelter on display is that you're able to look at stringy bark, look at its materiality, imagine this shelter being made and come right up close. How visible this is. It looks like the designs on the escarpment country, the stenciled handprints which cover the rock escarpment in Western Arnhem Land, and also you can see larger than life really, Naliod, the rainbow serpent, Namakon, the lightning spirit, and Luma Luma, the ancestral giant. The work is a palpable embodiment of how bark painting originated on wet season bark shelters. This was an incredible acquisition that we acquired before Sotheby's auction. We demanded that it come to the NGV, and we stated our price and we acquired it, and I consider it a great treasure. In 1991, 16 artists from Maningrida were challenged to work on a monumental three-dimensional scale for the first time for an exhibition at Gallery Gabriel Pizzi titled Devil Devil Gone Walkabout. I walked to this exhibition from the NGV with James Mollison because we saw that this was something important and revolutionary. A new generation of artists, inspired by the paperbark Mimi sculptures of Crusoe Guningbal, transformed jungle trees into powerful and flash embodiments of ancestral creators, malevolent beings and trickster spirits. The supernatural beings bear intricate maps of country on their torsos, scarification marks on their arms and legs, signs of human diseases like the Warrabunbun figures of Michael Nalabia, and physically invade intercultural spaces. Here they are, made real for us. These have all been imagined because they are all intangible, but they are very, very much remembered, these ancestors of the people who've made them. Hollow logs such as these from across Arnhem Land, Guningu artists call them Loricon, Burara artists call them Larrican, and Yolngu artists call them Larrakitch. It's interesting that they render public memorial bone containers, customarily painted with ritual designs belonging to the deceased and positioned on country of the deceased to be left there. When missionaries came, these were replaced with coffins because it was not thought hygienic that the bones would be painted and left in these containers. So now we have the benefit of them being made in an intercultural way when there is no more bark available because the wet season has passed. In contrast to the regularly shaped loricon preferred in Western Central Arnhem Land on the left of this slide, Yolngu artists from East Arnhem Land search for unusually shaped, hollowed-out stringy bark trees with gnarls and splits, and may, like Wanapati, in size, drill into and or paint them with their sacred minchi clan designs. These moikoi, ghost or spirit, shadow spirits from Milingimbi in East Arnhem Land, derive from ephemeral bound bark figures or from Wurrumul figures influenced by grave posts of the Macassans. Their pointed chins or goatees memorialise Macassan Trepang fishermen. Lippinger's figures with Gupapingu diamond designs represent Muriana, a wild honey spirit, whereas the slender figures embellished with lorikeet feather armbands and linear facial markings are decorated front and back with Gunalbingu chevron designs that signify Lunguruma, the northeast wind, which brings the monsoons. Philip Gooday's Warrala figures, suspended from forked sticks, like the construction of the bark shelter, render public something seen in customary ritual contexts. David Malangi has a very sort of bold painting and sculptural style. Here he represents his ancestor Gurumayingu and his wife. Three great Yolngu artists and clan leaders, Marwalin, Dundawoi and Mungaroi, have sculpted representations of their creator ancestors, bearing exquisite designs bequeathed to them by the ancestors, which are given physical form in their sculptures. The sculptural forms are vehicles for the designs that are worn by Yolngu in ceremony are embedded in their country. Sculptures such as this that I'm showing you really were made during the 1960s. That was the time when they were at their zenith. And once again, we have to imagine an artist giving a physical form to something intangible, sung about, but unseen. And this is their way of showing, of rendering it, that ancestor physical. An ochre painting on stringy bark, irregular, three-dimensional, curving back to its tree shape, splitting, bending, concave, convex, knotty, has a singular aesthetic, which is the product of the medium. I regard these as objects. I do not worry if they bend or split or are warped or they won't sit flat on the wall. They are organic things. The designs that dance on its surface may be painted or incised as per the two central works by Wanapati, or may be applied to twisted metal, as is in and his Tongue of Flame from his very recent solo exhibition at Tolano Galleries in Melbourne. The design exists in synergy with the organic surface, echoing the participant's body or the surface of country, where the designs also are found. These monumental organic shields carved from native fig tree buttress roots and fantastically shaped bicornual or two-horned baskets woven from lawyer cane, adorned with painted designs, are unique to cultures of the far North Queensland rainforests. Look how they project across space. Incredible objects and great protection with those shields. They are huge. Great protection for a whole human body. Wick, ochred, milkwood carvings of anthropomorphic and zoomorphic creator ancestors are customarily made for use in their mortuary ceremonies or house openings. The striped and dotted body designs indicate different places on country. At these ceremonial events, sculptures related to the country of the deceased are placed in front of the house in which the person formerly lived, and most of these sculptures are of human scale. It is one of the great sculptural regions of Australia, and a great collection was formed by Mr. Mackenzie, the Presbyterian missionary at Arakoon, for the National Museum of Australia. And these works were borrowed for Aboriginal Australia, an exhibition on which I worked for 3 years, and I'll never forget seeing them. They are incredible, incredible objects. I just want to show you the way they carved frill-neck lizards and the wonderful camp dogs, which are also part of their creation stories, the freshwater shark. There are, of course, songs and stories for all of these carvings. Incising of Wandjina ancestral beings on boab nuts and slates is practiced in the northwest and central Kimberley by descendants of Wandjina ancestral beings, as evidenced by this rare incised Wandjina on wooden panel by Manila Karadada. Other sculptures are made for public ceremonies, such as the Guria Guria, which was given to Rover Thomas and led to the origins of the East Kimberley School of Landscape Painting. And they're generally inspired by the dream visitations. Mung Mung's one-off Mary of Warman is a two-way interpretation in textured ochres on wood of a Catholic icon, the Virgin Mary, pregnant with child. I think that is the most incredible sculpture, and it was shown in Images of Religion in Australian Art, an exhibition curated by Sister Rosemary Crumlin, which I also worked on. In 1989, following the introduction of acrylic painting in the Utopia homelands of the Sandover in Central Australia, Imagara and Alyadara artists Billy Morton Pajara, Wally Pula, and Janice Nware initiated raw carvings from beanwood, customarily used to make shields in this part of the Central Desert. Gadaicha, the ritual law enforcer, is often represented, as well as animals hunted as bush tucker and women painted up for Awulia ceremonies. This is a completely new art form in this part of Central Australia. There is a lot of innovation happening right across Aboriginal Australia and the Torres Strait, which all goes to show that the culture is alive and bursting with energy. This is a slide of a work that we borrowed for 65,000 years from the National Gallery of Australia. Working innovatively with jumpy, spinifex grasses on their homelands, senior Ngundarra women of Jumpy Desert Weavers sculpt subjects that range from life-size Toyotas and ancestral beings to small dinosaurs, helicopters, birds and animals. The interesting thing is that this art form was developed at Blackstone, and a particular Kunmanara artist started out by weaving saucepans, and then she went on to weave large figures. Kunmanara Benson, her name was. This huge installation conjures forth the dramatic ancestral story of the seven sisters who were relentlessly pursued across country by Wati Niru. There he is, lurking behind a tree, the voyeur. He was a trickster spirit who wanted to take the eldest sister as his wife in contravention of customary law. The sisters constantly evade their pursuer, leaving traces of their journey in the landscape, and eventually transform into the Pleiades constellation seen above. Wati Niru becomes the Orion constellation, still in vain pursuit of the sisters, because a lot of women's law is about protecting themselves from unwanted advances from the opposite gender. In 2001, a great ceramicist, Kunmanara Jungala, began making terracotta ceramics at Ernabella. His terracotta forms often represent his father's Pintupi country, as evidenced by these manifestations of Ilhili, Yumari, and Wollonguru, far to the west. Ilpili represents the scrub, trees, spinifex grasses, rock forms, red sand, clouds, and big sky of the place where he grew up before moving east to Ernabella. Remembering that Ernabella was the first place to establish a craft room, an art centre for women in 1948. So we must remember the Unanul people of the APY lands who have been at the forefront of making art for a very long time. Hermannsburg Potters is a celebrated Western Aranda-owned art centre, home to a dedicated group of artists who for over 30 years have created vibrantly painted, hand-built terracotta spherical forms with sculpted lids that picture their country, mission days, and elements of contemporary life, such as the racist taunting by Collingwood supporters of St Kilda footballer Nicky Winmar at Docklands Stadium, who lifted his jumper as he was being spat on and pointed proudly to his skin. I think that there is a great deal of life in these ceramic forms, and we must remember that these artists have been inspired by Albert Namatjira, the Western Aranda watercolourist, whose art is still haunts us to this day. Established in 2000 as a response to the chronic social issues faced in Alice Springs in the town camps, Yaranti Eltier is now renowned for the playful, soft sculptures made by Western Aranda women from stitched and embellished recycled bush-dyed blankets. Look at Marlene and Sally Rabunch's work. Woman with arms up because she is proud, or that incredible desert mermaid. Great imagination, playfulness, life. The exquisite incised designs on sacred Kamilaroi dendroglyphs, such as the one pictured on the left, which was cut out of country and deposited in the Australian Museum. Remembering these are memorial trees made to stand in country of the deceased as a memorial, and possum skin cloaks of Southeast Australia, this Gunditj Mara possum skin cloak. They encode an artist's connection with country and spiritual identity in the land. A deceased person would be wrapped in a possum skin cloak. There are probably only 3 or 4 19th century examples extant in the world, but it is now a thriving form of art making right through the southeast of Australia, where it is specially treasured. Similarly, the ochred and incised designs on hardwood broad and parrying shields made with stone tools or possum jaw engravers resemble conceptual maps of country. Such precious cultural objects reveal iconography specific to the first people of Victoria. These are sublime carvings in anyone's language. Yvonne Kulmatri weaves customary objects like eel traps and burial baskets from sedge, gathered from the riverland as her ancestors did. She also creates innovative maps of country, a magic weaver self-portrait in sedge, airplanes, hot air balloons, Murray cod, echidnas, you name it. For her, weaving is a form of healing and of being close to her ancestors in the Riverland. And remember, she represented Australia with Emily Nware and Judy Watson at the Venice Biennale of 1997. Lorraine Conley Northey was born and grew up in Swan Hill, disconnected from mainstreams of culture, language and ceremony through colonisation. Rather than coil weaving with sedge, which was not part of her upbringing, Conley Northey has initiated a dramatic sculptural practice that suits her personal history and Wiradjuri identity. She works with discarded post-industrial materials, the detritus of colonisation. These are her oils on canvas, that she refashions into objects and installations resonant with cultural memory and political meaning. This conceptualisation of a possum skin cloak is a real treasure. It also has a fringe. Possum skin cloak, Blackfella Road, was commissioned for Melbourne Now by the NGV. And in it, Lorraine Conley Northey confronts the desecration of sacred burial sites resulting from the construction of an unsealed road near Swan Hill. This road is boycotted by Conley Northey and her family and continues to haunt the artist, as does her memory of visiting and witnessing such despoiled places with her father. The fringe of the cloak represents hunters and gatherers whose skeletal remains were violated, signified by their multiple artefacts and disembodied hands that clamour for social justice. Trillaway artist Julie Goff made these floating necklaces that echo the shape of Lutruwita while working in Townsville, far away from her homeland. She stated, "They resemble life preservers, operating perhaps as memory retainers for people on the edge. I feel I can, in my mind's eye, walk into Townsville Beach with these wrapped around me and float into the sea and wash up back in northeast Tasmania. The coal necklace seen is like the weighty lifeblood of ancestry, the coal-black materiality of the earth that I haven't answered or perhaps recognised. The persistence of culture," she says about, "in the early 1830s, a man on horseback in the far northwest of Tasmania recounted with awe how an Aboriginal woman at a great many paces managed to hurl a spear as he rode past that pierced and took his hat. It is rare to hear of Tasmanian Aboriginal women throwing spears, but dangerous times make people resourceful. This work is about the spirit of survival and the multi-purpose, multicultural, multiple means by which this is achieved and can be remembered." I'm looking at work of a great Yorta sculptor from Victoria, Linonis. Maralinga exposes the atomic bomb tests conducted there from 1956 to 63. Symbolising the desecration and pollution of the Australian landscape and the forced displacement of Anangu from their country. In the chilling realism of the mother and child sheltering from each other from the bomb's lethal wind blast, the composition is also a potent evocation of the human desolation caused by all wars and instruments of war. The plexiglass mushroom cloud and radioactive symbols are insidious pointers of the atomic poison which turned country to glass at Maralinga and Emu Field. Taking the children away is an indelible expression of the sorrow experienced by so many Indigenous mothers as they watch their children being forcibly stolen from their families by the so-called Aborigines Protection Board. This traumatic assimilationist practice left a lasting intergenerational impact on their lives and the well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people throughout Australia. This is a case of photorealism in 3D. We displayed both of these works in Power and Beauty at the Heidi Modern Museum of Art, and also this one in 65,000 Years. We see the ramifications of the eugenic tests conducted at the University of Melbourne by Professor Richard Berry, misconstrued attempts to prove the inferiority of First People. Linonis's Dingoes, 1989, and Fruit Bats, 1991, reveal a playful side of his art making. While at Lake Eyre, owners discovered dingoes, animals with strong survival instincts, skill and dignity, and saw strong parallels between dingoes and First People. Their fight against extinction, survival and adaptation to new and imposed environments. Dingoes became like totems for owners, and he made them uniquely Aboriginal by striping their bodies in the 4 ochre colours, whereas the wickedly humorous Fruit Bats depicts 100 cross-hatched fiberglass fruit bats that are culturally revered in Arnhem Land, hanging on a suburban Hills Hoist clothesline where they are regarded as infernal pests. These are some of his very great sculptures, and he really reserved his best work for sculpture. He regarded painting as more his bread and butter. We're looking at the work of a great glass blower and an incredible archivist, Ioane Scarce. In this work, she places revered photographs of her members of her family, in many cases the only surviving photographs of her ancestors, inside pickling jars. And above each of the pickling jars, which refers to their time on missions, their time in country attacked by the atomic tests, she places a hand-blown example of bush food. I think Oppression, Repression, Family Portrait, an early work of hers, is an incredible installation sculpture. Very, very powerful and moving. The Collected depicts scientific analysis of Aboriginal people, subjected to scrutiny in life and death. Their graves were robbed during settlement and their bodies dissected for scientific research. Once complete, numerous bones were stored in museums around the world. Scarce has utilised the traditional long yams as a metaphoric tool for body parts that have been stored in containers, often used by museums to display collected items. She very cleverly works with found objects, and these drawers are very much like the museum drawers that you would see where skeletal remains are deposited. Blood on the Wattle is a sculpture that was commissioned for Melbourne Now, the first iteration of it. It is a chilling memorial to a distressing massacre of Aboriginal people at Elliston, South Australia, who in 1849 were wrongly accused of stealing sheep from Thomas Cooper Horn's station and pushed off a cliff. The Perspex coffin contains 400 blown glass black bush yams lying over two mounds that signify the unknown number of Indigenous people who have died through colonisation. As Scarce has stated, there has been very little acknowledgement of genocide in this country, and I am still waiting for more memorials to be installed in areas where many deaths have occurred. The brilliance of Scarce is that this is a magnificently finished, beautiful work of art. The Perspex coffin references, of course, European coffins, but it also enables us to see those glistening black yams. She celebrates them as black and shining and the beautiful proportions, organic yams. And I think this work has an immense power. Its beauty is part of its message. I'm finishing with a work that we included in 65,000 Years, a short history of Australian art, in the Dead House. It was shown with archival documents that called out the eugenic tests, the trade in ancestral remains that were practiced at the University of Melbourne in the medical departments. They were with other responses from Julie Dowling, Julie Goff, and Brooke Andrew to these atrocities, which they felt dearly as descendants of ancestors who had been maltreated in this way. This work condemns the inhuman eugenic practices of coroner Ramsay Smith, who had a very dark and macabre interest in decapitating deceased people, not just Aboriginal people, but people who were vulnerable. Smith was known for interfering with corpses that were to be buried in the West Terrace Cemetery and dissecting them in the dead house of the Botanic Gardens in Adelaide. He was the main supplier of Aboriginal remains to universities and museums in the United Kingdom. So I'd just like to go back to something beautiful and wondrous to finish on. I think Carol Cooper has called these the greatest sculptures in Australia, the works that were made in Victoria. If you imagine the design technology that lies behind each of these shields, with a handle cut out of the solid wood or inserted to form a handle, an artist incising these sacred designs into this wood with possum jaw engravers or stone tools, and then lovingly inlaying the red and white ochre onto these objects that will be given to an initiate to explain his country, his identity, the law. If we think about the design technology of such objects and the sheer beauty of the organic materials, the malka, the parrying shield used to ward off blows, we think about them being used as well. The shields were there to protect them as invaders came with their guns. I think these works show us that the greatest of sculpture, like the greatest of art, exists in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australia, and it is something that we celebrate and honour in the works that we have seen together, because remembering that it is much more important to look at these things and experiencing them than read words. Thank you very much. I've come to the end of the talk.
Thank you so much, Judith, for sharing your insights into this astounding collection of Indigenous sculpture, just encompassing such a diversity of style, materials, subjects, meaning and emotion.
Thank you, Janine. We've got some interesting questions, Judith.
Okay.
I'm going to start with a more practical one, which was someone asking for an idea of scale. How tall are the tiwi tutini poles or sculptures?
They can range usually about 2 to 3 metres tall.
So human scale.
Larger, sometimes larger. They're towering, because I use the word towering, and the ironwood is, as I say, resistant to termites, extremely hard. But the ones that are made for burial sites are actually made from bloodwood, so that they will be weathered and, disintegrate and become part of country.
Judith, how should Indigenous sculpture, pre-contact, post-contact and contemporary, be curated in order to best connect the viewer to the work? What is at stake here?
I believe that it is best to show sculpture in its cultural context. Therefore, I like to cluster objects from a particular cultural group together, such as tiwi with tiwi, or larrakitch, Yulnor larrakitch together, divide them into particular clans and keep those cultural connections distinct. I believe that's very important. It is, however, very interesting to reveal sculpture with painting from different communities. Therefore, it's fascinating to show tiwi painting with sculpture, or a Majara al Yarra acrylic paintings with some of those very raw sculptures. Similarly, I think that it's better to keep organic materials with organic materials, but it is much better if we don't position them in a corner and prevent the back being seen. It is wonderful if we can have a shield even if it's wall mounted, a long way from the wall so people can see the back of it and understand the design technology and imagine it being used on country. That was what we were trying to do in 65,000 years. The Tiwi Pukamani installation of the Tiwi exhibition, we tried to create a circular formation which reflects the Tiwi Pukamani sites on Melville and Bathurst Island, and we wanted our audience to be able to walk all the way around all of those Tutini, which was what happened, rather than shoving them in a corner or preventing people from being able to see all sides. So and best thing is not to have them in glass cases. If we can stop that, then we actually, the jumpy weavers to be able to walk all the way around it. We started with a back view, and then suddenly the full bodies came into play when we turned the corner, which I thought the figures were very powerful from the rear as well. Incredible things. And life size.
Would you agree that 20th century Indigenous art is the most significant global cultural achievement of Australia's post-white settlement history?
I agree wholeheartedly. I couldn't agree more. It is the only art that's unique to this continent, as we know. It's not been transplanted from anywhere else. It comes out of the land, and it definitely is a huge achievement. And hopefully we can also understand and celebrate knowledge, Indigenous knowledge. And also, I forgot to say about that other question, that it is also great to show contemporary work that emerges in response to 19th century examples. So it is wonderful if we were able to show one of those 19th century possum skin cloaks with next door to the Lorraine Conley Northey, because then we're able to show that the art and culture exist in a continuum, which is so important.
One question is to do with the extent to which this lecture tonight is a reflection of your own curatorial career. Are these works that you are very familiar with, or not necessarily works you've actually handled yourself or included in exhibitions?
Yes, it is definitely the product of my curatorial career. It is work that I have seen and loved, that I feel warrant inclusion. I have chosen some of these works for NGV exhibitions or for loans, or I remember seeing them and they matter to me. And if I'm given a chance to curate an exhibition or curate a lecture, I want to show works that inspire and also that do justice to the artists who have made them. Otherwise, there is no point.
Well, you've certainly inspired us tonight. I think we'll leave the questions at this point.
So now I'd like to introduce Anthony de Jong, who's currently the Duldig Studio treasurer, but he's also a founding board member and immediate past president, and also the son of Eva and the grandson of Carl and Slava.
Thank you to everyone. I'm going to start, before I thank Judith, thanking Alison. We have our own AI, Alison Inglis, and I think she demonstrated that when she gave us such a fantastic overview of Judith's background, and we're fortunate to have such a great introduction. But also, this is probably more than 20 years that Alison has been a supporter of the Duldig Studio in a variety of roles. She's currently on her exhibitions and collections subcommittee still, and continues to be fantastic promoter of the lecture every year with her students, with fellow academics and the museum professionals and museum industry in Australia and abroad. So firstly, thank you to Alison for her excellent introduction and facilitation of the questions. Now, moving on to Judith, well, what a lot of ground to cover. I'm pleased that she agreed about the importance of the Indigenous art in putting Australia on the map globally. And I think she really brought a huge amount of evidence to that effect. You know, her commitment to research, the breadth of the things that she showed us today, her ability to support, promote and raise the awareness of Indigenous art and the artists, and particularly the focus on sculpture was fantastic this evening. And a couple of things that I'd draw out on that. I just really liked the simplicity and elegance when she was talking about truth and beauty, and then she showed us the bark shelter. Something had a functional purpose, but was presented in such a simple way. Even, you know, those shields, which she finished on, which she touched on earlier, they're 150 years ago, those shields were created. And you think about what must have been so different in the world and what was going on with those creators at that point in Australia's history, and what that led to in inspiring such great works. And then the other thing that struck me was just the range of materials that, you know, Judith drew our attention to. You know, everything from the detritus of colonisation, modern materials like fiberglass and blown glass, and how that was then used to describe some much more natural materials, the possum skin cloaks, the soft sculptures, the hard ironbark wood, the shells and stones and necklaces, and, you know, the terracotta and the ceramics. Just such a great range of mixed media that was brought to, along with tremendous form. And I really also liked, finally, the way that some pretty challenging subject matter was beautifully presented in those works by Yoni Scarce, right before the end there, but also other challenging topics that were presented in a very nice and considered way. The Nicky Winmar sculpture, for example. Look, just a tremendous range. It's definitely piqued my curiosity in particularly Indigenous sculpture, which, like a lot of sculpture, tends to play second fiddle in the topic of Indigenous art, just as it does for a lot of Western art or art in other countries. But clearly a really significant area, a fantastic lecture, and really want to thank Judith for all her work in delivering that to us this evening. Now, I also, before we go, want to thank some of our supporters, particularly the City of Stonington. They've provided ongoing support to the Duldig Studio around our public event program. They're an important partner to us in the local community, and they support us through an Arts and Culture grant, which we've been fortunate to receive now a couple of times. And I'd also like to thank the team behind the scenes. A lot of planning and preparation goes into an event like tonight, and to present it so well. Obviously, our president, Janine Kibblewhite, the founder and key supporter, Eva de Jong Duldig, who's still an important and driving force, Gina Panabianco, who provides invaluable support to the whole board, Melinda Mockridge, Curatorial Research Associate, who's had a long relationship with us, and more recent participants in the team, Valentina Bidanova, our new Operations and Program Manager, who you'll be hearing a lot more from next year. And finally, Sophie Bishop, our Marketing and Administration Coordinator. I'd particularly like to acknowledge Eva's work as the founder and patron, and the ongoing commitment she has to making sure that the art of her parents and the story of the Duldig family is available to the wider community. You can see here a picture in the studio taken in the 1960s, mid-1960s, of my grandfather, Carl Duldig. And the studio, is largely unchanged today. There's a few more works to see, and that big monument actually sits in Israel as a monument to Jewish sportsmen that were unfortunately lost their lives in the Holocaust. Finally, I'd like to thank our audience. It's terrific to see so many of our long-term supporters in the audience tonight, as well as some new supporters and people who are interested in this topic. I'll wrap up for this evening. Thank you, everyone. Thank you specifically to Judith for a fantastic lecture this year, and also to Alison for a great introduction.